Good morning. My name is Adam Nee. I'm the executive director of the Nantucket Book Foundation. And yep. Oh, thank you. That's very nice. I'm also the survivor of 3 days of festivaling, as I hope many of you are as well. So before I introduce our next speaker, I want to thank our top donors: Richie Battle, Randy and Lisa Cohn, Ellen and Linwood Dame, Elizabeth Galvin, Mary and Robert Haft, Nancy Seaman and Alan Schwartz, Beth Wilkinson and David Gregory. Yes, why not? I'm doing this every day. And our top sponsors, the White Elephant and Boston Globe. If everybody could, oh yes, of course. If everyone could take a minute and silence their cell phones, I'm gonna leave mine on full blast so that it's interrupted constantly, but everyone else keep it down. And as Amy announced earlier, all authors after their sessions will be signing books in the lobby. So, I have to confess that I'm in awe of our next speaker. This morning's author has spent his entire adult life fighting injustice with a tenacity and drive that is truly incredible. His nonprofit newsroom, Injustice Watch, continues to foster positive change in the country and in the lives of the people it champions. It's not every day that I get to introduce a civil rights crusader, let alone a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist. But it is even more rare that I get to introduce and welcome the father of the Carolina Hurricanes general manager in the middle of their Stanley Cup Finals run. And so, without further ado, please welcome to the stage Rick Tulsky. Good morning.
Good morning. Does that work? Yeah.
Good. Are you sleeping at all with your son's team in the finals? I need to know. Are you sleeping at all?
That's what I thought you asked. I'm sleeping fine. It's when I'm awake that I'm a little nervous.
That sounds about right. So most people in this room would know you as a journalist, given your decorated career of investigative journalism, but you're also a lawyer. Can you take us through that unusual combination and how those two identities came together?
I got out of journalism school as an undergraduate right after Watergate. And we all wanted to go into journalism to change the world. And after 3 years at small papers in Michigan, I ended up in Jackson, Mississippi, where it was a life-changing experience. And I developed this deep sense of civil rights and why it matters when the court system doesn't protect minority rights. And so when I got to the Philadelphia Inquirer, where the police were out of control in those days, I went to law school around my work schedule. I went to law school never intending to practice, but to use my knowledge to be better in my writing about the flaws of criminal justice.
Interesting. And so when did you know that that was sort of your passion, and that's what you wanted to spend your life pursuing, or versus another assignment as a sort of journalism subject?
What happened in Jackson is it had been a really extraordinarily backward paper promoting segregation, and James Meredith had been the first black man to enter Ole Miss, and the paper editorialized and fought against him. And when he came into the newsroom asking for me to tell me about police abuse and corruption in Jackson, that was a moment.
Wow. So then, sometime later, you returned to your hometown and you joined Northwestern's journalism school, and then you co-founded Injustice Watch, the nonprofit newsroom. Can you, for the people in the audience, tell us a little bit about Injustice Watch and what made you want to build an institution rather than just the writing that you were doing?
I went around the country. I went from Philadelphia to the West Coast, and I worked at the LA Times and the San Jose Mercury News. And as newspapers shrunk their ambition, I never shrunk my ambition. So I had to find new ways to do it. And I also I taught at the University of Pennsylvania while I was a reporter. After I got my law degree, I needed something else to do. And I really liked mentoring the next generation. So as newspapers were falling apart, I got hired at Northwestern to create a program to mentor students in investigative reporting and why it mattered. And then a new dean came in and repurposed that money for a master's in sports journalism, because that would attract more students.
So that's pretty comparable, right? Those two.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Pretty same thing.
So I took the model I had created, and with Rob Warden, who spent his career at the Center for Wrongful Convictions at Northwestern, we co-founded Injustice Watch, and it was dedicated to studying the criminal justice system and the entire court system in Cook County. And one of my pet peeves are elected judges, because in places like Chicago, nobody has any idea for whom they're voting when they go into the booth. Many modified the system used by my mother, which would be to go into the booth, pick out the women's names, pick out the Jewish names, and then anybody else could not possibly get the vote, and she left. That's not the way you pick judges. So in Justice Watch, I had a group of interns, fresh out of school, some still in school, and I mentored them in how to look up records of all the judges, and out of that, Injustice Watch created the first guide so that when people went into the voting booth in Cook County, they could be armed with knowledge.
Amazing. Thank you. I noticed you wrote a book.
I needed something else to do.
That's right. You seem to be, you have a lot of free time, judging by your history so far. And I don't know how many people in the audience have read it. It was just out this year. I personally can't remember the last time I was so gripped by a nonfiction book. People were applauding that. Did you have the same experience? Yeah. It reads like a crime story. I mean, like a thriller, and yet it's just impossible to believe that it's all a true story. I mean, the number of times I let out audible gasps reading it, as I'm sure you did reporting it. Can you, for the people that haven't read it, can you sort of take us through a little bit about Lamont McIntyre, who he is, and how you first came across him in this story and everything?
While I was at the Philadelphia Inquirer, there were three of us who won the Pulitzer. One was, it was me and two partners. One was Buzz Bissinger, who went on to write Friday Night Lights, and his son is sitting in the front row.
All luminaries here at Nantucket. We're full of them. Yes.
And the third was Dan Biddle. And Dan Biddle stayed in Philadelphia. He had gone to the University of Michigan as an undergraduate, and he was co-editor of the Michigan Daily, and his co-editor, they were having a catch-up to have a reunion, and she started describing what she was doing now, and she had become a lawyer and told Dan she's in Kansas City and has the case of a lifetime. And as she started describing it to Dan, Dan interrupted and said, "You need to talk to Rick Tulsky." So even though there's plenty to do in Cook County about corruption, I ended up going to Kansas City, Kansas, to meet with Cheryl and hear about the case. And what was gripping about the case, as she told it, before I know anything, she said there's a really, really corrupt cop. There is a really, really corrupt prosecutor. There is court-appointed defense counsel because there was no public defender office. And this guy was so bad, he was later disbarred. And the judge in the case had a prior affair with the corrupt prosecutor and was ruling in her favor on everything. So it gave me the chance to look at this case and write about all the things I had witnessed in various ways in a lot of different cases over my career. Lamont's case is, in short, at 17, he is wearing a white T-shirt with his cousins when a murder occurred more than a mile away. The man who committed the murder was wearing black and walked up to a parked Cadillac where two men, this is 1994, in a rundown neighborhood, they were sitting in a car with a cracked pipe. Somebody walks up to the car, blows them both away, turns and walks away, and within 2 hours, Lamont is arrested. And Lamont is not only wearing the wrong clothing, he doesn't have a gun. In fact, he never owned a gun, nor shot a gun. He did not know the people in the car and had no reason to kill them. Nevertheless, he's locked up within 6 months, and it took 23 years before he got out. I met him while he was still in prison and I've seen lots of bad cases. This case topped it all, and Lamont, one little extra detail I'll add, when I first meet him, I go to the prison, and he's sitting at a table, and I introduce myself, and I ask him to tell me what he knows about this murder. Now, as reporters, most of the time, when you're in that situation, the person you're talking to will be so eager to win you over that he will embellish and offer details that may or may not be correct, but he really wants to grab you. What Lamont said was, I don't know anything. I don't know why I'm here. I've been here 23 years and nobody can explain why I'm here. And that moment got me.
I'd love to have you read this entire book aloud to the audience, selfishly. Is there a passage you could read that kind of...
I can try.
Yeah.
It took about 3 hours for Lamont and a couple dozen other prisoners, handcuffed and shackled, to be taken by bus from Central Processing in Topeka to the Hutchinson Correctional Facility. Lamont had never been so far away from home on his own. It was cold as hell on that February day, and he was wearing only his prison-based brown pullover with matching pants. Entering B2 cell house felt like walking into hell without the fire. He felt like he was outside his body looking at himself. People were screaming, fresh meat on the block, and new booty as he made his way to the single-person cell, about 15 feet by about 10 feet. Lamont was put in one of the 3 cells closest to the guard station so that he could be watched closely. Each time the phone rang in the guard station, Lamont thought it was the court system calling to say they discovered they had made a mistake in convicting him. It was a call that never came. I'll just add to that he then spends a couple weeks before, after several days under the guard's watchful eye, Lamont was assigned to a cell 1 floor up. A fellow inmate who worked as a porter, Lafayette Gaydon, helped him carry his things up the stairs and was struck by the sincerity of Lamont's tone as the cell door slammed shut. "Forget this. I'm here for something I didn't do." Not only did his complaint ring true to Gaydon, Lamont had avoided swearing over his predicament. That caught Gaydon's notice. Gaydon gave Lamont 2 presents that day: a porn magazine and a rolled cigarette of bugler tobacco. After all, Lamont may have been old enough to be sent to jail for 2 lifetimes, but he was not yet old enough to buy his own pack of cigarettes at the commissary.
That really hit me, that section. I mean, Lamont and I are basically the same age. And, you know, in your book, you talk about the end result, and I'd love you to take us through that. But I was thinking about the amount of time that he was, how I felt and how old I was in that moment at 17, and all the life that I experienced, you know, until 41. Can you tell a little bit about the exoneration? Because in your book, it seemed like it was such a protracted battle to get to that moment of justice.
Just to walk you through what happened. So 23 years in prison. And I should explain how I'm able to write with such detail about things that happened where I wasn't, because as a reporter, I don't make up quotes. I just try to get the best things I can. After several years in prison, Lamont's mother read in Jet magazine about this guy in Princeton, New Jersey, who worked to get people out of prison. And Jim McCluskey is this extraordinary man who takes on cases. He had entered Princeton Theological Seminary and realized his calling was helping prisoners who are wrongly convicted. And Lamont and his mother spent 6 years writing to Jim McCluskey, trying to win him over, and finally they do. And he comes to Kansas City, Kansas, and he hires Cheryl Pilot, the former co-editor of the Michigan Daily, and together they spend 6 more years building the case. Because this is the days, there's no DNA in this case. This isn't Barry Scheck or the Innocence Project coming in and showing wrongful conviction because of DNA. Jim McCluskey, to convince a court that the wrong man is in prison, he had to show, number one, everything that was corrupt that led to the conviction, and number two, he had to solve the crime and show what really happened. So he spent years with Cheryl building the case, and the magic happened. I started writing about it while he was still locked up, and interviewed many of the people and did stories before the exoneration that maybe they helped a tiny piece to win public demand about the case. But Lamont's day finally comes, and they have a hearing, and he's exonerated. And afterwards, I tell McCluskey, I'm interested in a book. And what got me interested in the book, after the exoneration, I wrote stories, and they ran in Injustice Watch, and they ran, the New York Times used one of my stories. And it was a big deal, but it was over. And then what happened was there was so much corruption exposed that Lamont and his team fought David versus Goliath against the corrupt system. And it was that fight that made me say, this is more than a newspaper story. And I called McCluskey and told him I was interested in a book, and the magic thing happened. He said, come to Princeton, I'll open my files. So I went to Princeton, and he opens his files, and there in his files were lots of the details, step by step, everything he did with Cheryl to win the exoneration, who they talked to, what those people said. But then a really magical thing also in the files was Lamont's prison diary. And that's how I'm able to write with such authority about what was going on at the time for Lamont.
Amazing.
Lucky. We as a reporter, you know, you call enough people and you dig, and sometimes you just get lucky.
I'm not an investigative journalist. I can't imagine what it takes to sort of pursue these stories. This seems like a situation where you're introduced when lots has happened, but it's an evolving story, and you're really a part of it. You're also a lawyer. You sort of can appreciate these different problems and these different injustices to a point. How do you sort of balance the reporting side of it versus your engagement with the subjects, Jim McCloskey, with Lamont? I mean, you become sort of interwoven in this story.
As a newspaper reporter, we are taught. It's a really weird profession because if you do investigative reporting, you are out to change the world, but you have to go into every story open-minded and objective and trying not to get too close to someone that you become compromised. When you're doing a book, it's a different thing. And I spent so much time with Cheryl and with Lamont and with Jim McCloskey, and then with the people who had knowledge in some way about the wrongful conviction, and getting people to trust you on a level. As a newspaper reporter, you're there, you're gone, they forget about you. As a book writer, one of the things that happens is you show up over and over and they learn that they can trust you. But the other thing that I found that I had no clue, when people hear you're doing a book, they'll talk to you more openly than they would ever talk when I'm wearing a different hat of the investigative reporter.
Not the Carolina Hurricanes hat,
Not
a totally different metaphorical
really
hat. Yes.
It wins over some people, but people in Vegas, not so much.
That makes sense. Yeah. I was struck by that in the book, that there was a lot of distrust. I mean, the just describing the law enforcement and justice system there explains why there's so much distrust. How were you sort of able to get such compelling testimony and engagement from so many people in this neighborhood, especially years and years after the event in question?
What the community had suffered historically was, so Kansas City, Kansas is to Kansas City, Missouri, as Newark is to New York or Gary is to Chicago. It's the other state, the industrialized, impoverished place. And the people who lived there, the power structure was mostly Eastern Europeans who had come there when Kansas City was stockyards and meatpacking, and it was a very industrial place. And there was a large segment of black people who had come up to Kansas because of John Brown and the idea of freedom, and they discovered over time this was not a place of freedom for them. It was a place where their rights were regularly ignored. And as a result, this power structure didn't do anything to control the police department. And there was a cop on the force who arrested Roger Golubsky in April of 1994.
Lamont, yeah, who arrested Lamont.
Lamont. His name is Roger Golubsky. And Roger Golubsky is the villain of the book, but he terrorized the entire neighborhood. So nobody trusted the police. Nobody was talking to any people, especially white people. And that was one of the things Cheryl and Jim laid the groundwork and got people somehow to believe something good could come out of talking. And so I was a beneficiary, but I also developed my own relationships.
Your narrative is meant to offer a blueprint for equal justice, not just a chronicle of failure. You touched on this in your book, but what does that blueprint actually look like? And what can cities, states, and ordinary citizens do? You touched a little bit on this at the start about elected judges and things.
I could go on forever about this. So, to my mind, we're in a world where the rule of law is being threatened, and that threatens democracy. Not to overstate anything, but I think there's a lot at stake here, and I think as the federal system is really threatened, it's up to state and local governments to do the best they can to safeguard the rights of the vulnerable people in our society. Because if that doesn't happen, it's all hopeless. So at the end of the book, I mean, this book I use the narrative of Lamont and the horrible story of how he ended up wrongly convicted and how he ended up exonerated. But it's just a narrative to do what I really wanted to do, and that's to say, we as people need to demand that our local and state governments do everything they can to protect vulnerable people in the court system. So with that in mind, I interviewed in the last section of the book a couple dozen experts in how do we make the system better. A couple of them had a view that was even farther out than mine. Brian Stevenson at Equal Justice Initiative, when I said to him, how do we fix the system so there are no more Lamont McIntyres? His answer was, the system isn't broken. There's nothing to fix. It works the way it was intended to. That's a little too far for me. I still am an idealist. The reason I do investigative reporting is I think we can make the world better, and I think by exposing flaws, that's what can happen. So I interviewed lots of people about how do we make the system better, and the book ends with a coda in which I synthesize those views and incorporate my own ideas. And some of it is Band-Aids. How do you do better at eyewitness identification? But the real change that has to happen, and what we can all fighting for how to fix mistaken IDs, as one example, is technical. But we can demand that our officials try to break a culture that dominates too many police departments and to make sure that the police reflect the community in which they live and that they're there to protect us. The other thing we can do is demand accountability, because if the system breaks down, if nobody's watching the police, if nobody's watching the prosecutors, if nobody's watching the defense attorneys, and if elected judges are chosen, what you end up with a system in big cities especially, where it's just a sausage line trying to get these cases through, everybody's guilty, and let's just move on and not spend too much time on any case.
Wow.
Let's fix that.
Your book has drawn extraordinary praise. I think John Grisham called you a dogged investigator, journalist, lawyer, advocate, and gifted writer. So the complete package, I'd say. What was the hardest thing to write about in this story? And was there a scene or a truth you struggled to put on the page?
The hardest part for me, and can I digress and say, it's so extraordinary to be at the Nantucket Book Festival. And thank you to everybody who has put on this extraordinary thing. And I've been in awe of 2 days of all these fiction writers who have to imagine what happened and put it on the page and do so with wonderful detail. I had the luxury of just gathering facts and gathering enough facts that they could tell themselves. And people say I'm a good storyteller, but what I am is a good fact gatherer. So once I had them, it's a completely different process. Writing nonfiction than fiction is one of my takeaways from this weekend. But the hard part for me, Lamont, when he was in prison, was standing in the commissary line on visitor day, and there is a young woman, college student, and they start chatting. She's there to visit her brother, who's a friend of Lamont's. And before long, Carisha and Lamont have a prison relationship. They get married in prison. Lamont realizes he may never get out, and he forces a divorce. He gets out of prison, they remarry, and I thought it was going to be a happy ending. But for a while, Lamont, who thinks of me sometimes as an older brother, he would call me and say, Rick, I don't know what to do. She doesn't understand. I never learned how to be a man. I came in at 17, I came out at 41, and I don't know how to be a good husband. And that whole Lamont-Carisha relationship was a really hard part for me.
Yeah, it's hard to imagine. Last question.
Sure.
And then we'll take questions from the audience. What do you want someone who finishes Injustice Town to do the next day? Not feel, but actually do.
I want all of us to pay attention to how your system works. And is there enough police accountability? Is there outside citizen review? How long in Kansas City, Kansas, the prosecutor, they set up the system of district attorneys in 1972, and a man named Nick Tomasek, who had been the young first assistant in the old office, was elected without opposition, and he ran 8 more times without opposition. Twice he had token opposition, but most of the time he ran with nobody else on the ballot. And the public wasn't paying attention. Nick was well-liked, but who really knows what's going on? And if there's no system to make accountability, what you have is prosecutors in the office who think the way to get ahead is to win the close cases and to get convictions in every case, and not think about the fact that just maybe the person might be innocent. So it wasn't until a black preacher named Mark Dupree got elected in 2016, running, after Nick retired after 32 years, his first assistant took over and ran without opposition 3 times. And finally, in 2016, Mark Dupree, a black preacher attorney, gets elected, determined to see that justice happens. And the first thing that hits him is the bulldog Cheryl Pilot saying, I've got an innocent man here. And Mark got put in the position of having to carefully develop the evidence. But Had there been a public that paid attention and didn't let people run unopposed for 44 years, maybe the system would have worked better a lot before Lamont spent 23 years in prison. And maybe if we make sure that the system, you know, one of the hard things about appointing defense counsel is the public doesn't really see the point in spending money to make sure that those accused of crimes get well defended. And maybe we ought to think about, gee, there needs to be enough money to have public defenders who can do their job and be zealous advocates. And if all those pieces happen, we'll have justice. So all of you can figure out which of those things you care about and start tomorrow to demand that it happens wherever you live.
Thank you. Do we have any questions in the audience for Rick? I'll even share my mic.
Rick, thank you, first of all, so much for being here and for bringing this important story to light here at our festival. And I know that your son, you have other places that you could be to watch very important hockey games, but we so appreciate you being here with us instead. My question is, it's hard not to feel powerless. Like, thank you for that, you know, pay attention. Yes, we're paying attention. I'm voting, I'm donating, I'm posting. I'm phone banking for politicians who will put, you know, to bring injustice, you know, to change the tide of injustice. And it's still hard not to feel powerless. So besides paying attention and voting and donating and phone banking, how can an ordinary citizen actually do this? How do we, you know, make sure that public defenders make more money? How do we make sure that people are paying attention? How do we actually do that? Because it feels like screaming into the void.
You're screaming into the void if you're doing it on your own, I think. But I think if you band together, our power is in our numbers. And if you find the issue you care about and get your neighbors to join you in caring about it and build community groups, and then you go to the elected officials who haven't thought about these issues the way they need to and make them care about it, that's how change happens.
Rick, you and I have spoken a little bit about this, and your book was so riveting to me because I was on a parole board, a state parole board years ago, and I saw kids, and they were 16 and 17 years old. They looked like my son's friends that I gave a ride home from football practice the day before, and looking into their files, the evidence was so scarce. So it leads me to believe that Lamont was not an anomaly. And I'd just like your opinion. I mean, is this a bigger problem than most of us think, that there are innocent people that no one is helping who are convicted on almost no evidence?
When Jim McCluskey got to Kansas for the first time, he goes in and he meets Lamont, and Lamont is shell-shocked and sitting with him expressionless. And McCluskey leans forward and says, "You realize you just won the lottery?" Because Jim McCluskey has thousands of people writing to the organization he created, Centurion Ministries. And there are, in almost every law school now, clinics devoted to innocence projects, which is another way you can get involved. You can support those kinds of organizations, to answer your question. The number of people, nobody knows. What we know for sure is that since 1989, there have been more than 5,000 people who were exonerated. There are so many more cases where, and here's a real issue, when it's discovered that somebody is wrongly convicted, often what the prosecutors will do is, instead of agreeing to do the right thing and drop charges and declare them innocent, they will go to the attorney and say, okay, I'll help you overturn the conviction if you agree to plead guilty, and we will give you a time-served sentence. So in other words, say you're guilty even if you're not, and you can walk out of prison today. So because that happens, we don't really know how many people have been established innocent, and what I know for sure is there are lots more cases who say they are, who there isn't enough money going into people working on their behalf. What I found, I didn't intend after the book to become like, let's do Lamont 2 and let's do Lamont 3, but I'm now hearing from people, you gotta look at this case, you gotta look at that case. And I'm one guy. I mean, it's extraordinary the number of people who need better help.
But look what one guy did to shine a light on this.
There you go.
My husband and I are originally from the East Coast, and we spent 25 years out in the panhandle of Texas, close to one of the reddest social injustice happening all the time areas. We're retiring here. But I want to thank you for writing this book. I really think it should be mandatory reading. Hopefully it doesn't make the banned book list out there, for starting in middle school. And I think the more educated that younger people get about the system, it can plant the seed of awareness and consciousness about their neighbors, their neighborhood, and who's making the laws. In Texas, as a lot of people may be following the midterm elections and what's been happening.
What, you don't think Ken Paxton will be a good choice?
I've knocked on doors and phone banks and for Beto O'Rourke against Rick Perry, and I mean, it's just been, and I'll have people come up to me and say, oh, I like your bumper sticker or yard sign, but we can't put that in our yard because of my husband's business. And a lot of them are retired teachers. My husband and I are in the medical field. But again, I just feel that a book like this is entertaining, factual, and I haven't read it yet. I will be buying it. And the way you speak is the way you write. It certainly should pass a reading level that most teenagers could read, do you think?
Yeah, I did my best to make it not legal at all and to just write it the way I tell it.
The story. Everybody has a story. And I'm very happy to say the church I belong to, Episcopal Church, is very much social justice for everybody that lives out there. And I will be promoting your book to everybody I know. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
We have time for a few more, or one more?
I think one more question.
Thank you for this wonderful talk. So at the beginning, you spoke about the power of mentoring and how important that is to now. And I'd love to close with just hearing some of the people that are in your heart as you write a book like this who have mentored you, that made it so you're someone that can fight with this kind of tenacity.
So in the audience today is a woman named Sue Zhang, whose sister I taught at the University of Pennsylvania and who is today, She was on the Pulitzer Committee choosing the best editorial writing this year. Getting people to care. Tyler Pager covers the White House for the New York Times. And people, I mean, I love doing that. And I also, a bunch of people I mentored have gone on to become lawyers. And I don't recommend anybody be a lawyer, really. But I do recommend that everybody fight to change the system. And that's all I try to do.
Thank you, Rick.